I've always believed there are two kinds of power in this world, the kind you inherit and the kind you claw for with your bare hands. Guess which one I had to settle for? By the time I turned 30, I thought I'd finally escaped the endless grind of proving myself. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. Project manager at a mid-size architecture firm in Boston, decent one, bedroom apartment, a cat named Atlas who tolerated me just enough to avoid charges of animal neglect. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The firm was my pride. I'd spent 8 years climbing the rickety ladder, surviving office politics like some kind of gladiator in a cocky arena. I managed multi-million-dollar builds, condo complexes, civic centers, the occasional sleek corporate tower. And I wasn't just good. I was the best. My projects came in under budget, on time, and without the nightmare lawsuits that plagued other teams. Naturally, that's why I became a problem. My boss, Eric Whitmore, was a parasite in a tailored suit. Picture a man who could charm a room full of investors while quietly signing deals that would sink them later. He thrived on appearances. His hair was sculpted, his teeth bleached, his watch always just out of reach for us, mere mortals, at the firm. He loved control, and he especially loved cutting people down who threatened to eclipse him. Guess who that was? It started small. He took credit for my design tweaks in meetings. He forgot to CC me on crucial emails, then accused me of being out of the loop. He'd roll his eyes in front of the partners when I spoke, just enough to make me look green and uncertain. I brushed it off at first. Every workplace has its egos, but it grew, a cancer disguised as management. And then there was the promotion. The firm had been dangling a director position for years, and when it finally came up, I was a shoo-in. Everyone knew it. My colleagues congratulated me before the announcement, saying, "About time, and you deserve this." But when the decision came down, Eric gave the job to his golf buddy, a guy named Trevor, who barely knew how to read a blueprint, but could drink 18 holes worth of scotch and laugh at Eric's jokes until sunrise. I was gutted. I confronted Eric in his glass, walled office. "Are you serious? Trevor, he's been here half the time I have, and he's screwed up more projects than he's finished." Eric leaned back in his chair, hands folded like a king indulging a peasant's tantrum. "You're good, no doubt, but difficult. A director needs polish. Someone who can communicate effectively with clients. Trevor has that charm. That was the word he chose instead of spineless brown noser. I left that office shaking, my ears ringing, and I told myself I'd swallow it. That hard work would still win out in the long run. But life doesn't hand out prizes for endurance, because that's when the setup hit me like a freight train. It started with whispers, an email from a subcontractor asking why I'd approved a payment that didn't match the invoice, a city inspector calling about safety reports that were missing from my last project. At first, I thought it was miscommunication. I triple checked my files, my signatures, my approval logs. Everything on my end was clean, but the mistakes kept piling up. Payments I never authorized, documents submitted under my name but altered in ways that cut corners, clients furious over promises I'd supposedly made. I stayed late night after night, combing through every record, and that's when I realized someone was forging my work. The realization hit me like ice water, and the only person with both the access and the motive, Eric. I had proof too. A trail of edits traced back to his assistant's login. Shady invoices routed through shell companies that conveniently tied back to contractors. Eric had dinner with every other week. He was using me as a patsy. If things blew up, my name was on the dotted line, not his. I confronted him again, this time not as politely. "Stop using my credentials, Eric. I know what you're doing." He gave me a smile so cold it could have frozen the Charles River. "Careful with those accusations. Sounds a lot like paranoia. You wouldn't want the partners to hear you're unstable." And then, just like that, I was exiled. Within 2 weeks, I was placed on administrative leave while the partners reviewed irregularities. My emails were cut off. My office locked. Rumors spread like wildfire about incompetence, about negligence, about me being the reason projects were suddenly over budget. Trevor, the golf buddy, slid into my position like he'd been born for it. And Eric, he gave a firm-wide speech about holding ourselves accountable while looking right at me. I'd been erased. By the time my severance check arrived, pathetic 6 weeks' pay, wrapped in legalese that screamed, "Sign this and shut up." I was radioactive in the industry. No one would touch me. Former colleagues avoided my calls. Recruiters ghosted. My career, 8 years of sweat and sacrifice, had been detonated at the press of Eric's silk-covered button. For the first few weeks, I lived in a fog. My apartment became a bunker, shades drawn, empty takeout containers multiplying like rabbits. I'd wake at 3 a.m. in a panic, convinced some marshal was about to kick down my door with fraud charges. Atlas, my cat, would sit on my chest and stare, as if to say, pathetic, you're letting him win. And maybe I was. Until the night I found myself scrolling through old project files on a backup drive, half drunk, seething at every forged signature and falsified report. My stomach churned with rage, but under it a spark lit up, small but undeniable. If Eric thought he'd buried me, he hadn't accounted for one thing: I had receipts, and I wasn't going to play defense anymore. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Personally, I think it's best served slow, like a five-course meal with every flavor engineered to make your target choke. Eric had stripped me of my career, my reputation, and the security I'd bled for. But he made a mistake. He underestimated how obsessive I can get when I'm cornered. I don't quit, I dig. The digging began with the drive I'd stumbled across that night, the backup folder of projects, invoices, and internal emails I'd archived. At the time, it was just insurance, a habit of mine. Now, it was a loaded gun. I spread everything across my apartment floor: printouts, receipts, sticky notes, timelines drawn in red pen like some conspiracy theorist building a map of the Illuminati. Atlas perched on the couch, tail flicking as if unimpressed with my descent into madness. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. Eric wasn't just sloppy, he was arrogant. The man had built a web of kickbacks, inflated invoices, and under the table deals with subcontractors. He'd shuffle money between shell companies, pad budgets with unexpected costs, and pocket the difference. The genius, if you could call it that, was how he pushed blame downstream. Engineers misfiled safety reports. Assistants typoed invoices. And when big money moved, it looked like I'd signed off. He was running a scam worth millions. The partners didn't see it. Why would they? Projects still made money, clients were still smiling, and Eric always played the charming rainmaker. To them, I was the weak link, the distraction. So the question wasn't whether Eric was dirty. The question was how to gut him without gutting myself in the process. I started with the people Eric thought were disposable, the subcontractors. See, Eric's kickback scheme relied on loyalty, but loyalty bought with dirty money is fragile. I spent weeks cold calling firms I'd worked with, pretending to be doing research for a freelance audit. Most hung up, but a few cracked when I hinted at irregularities with invoices. The panic in their voices told me everything. One night, I hit gold. A mid-level manager at a concrete supply company blurted, "Look, I didn't want to pay him, but it was either grease his palm or lose the contract. What was I supposed to do?" Bingo, I didn't push too hard. I didn't want him to clam up. Instead, I thanked him, hung up, and documented every word in my notes. Piece by piece, the puzzle was filling in. Then came the email trail. Eric thought he was clever using his assistant's login, but digital forensics doesn't lie. Metadata showed edits traced back to his office computer at 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday, when no one else was around. I cross-referenced that with building security logs. Guess who'd swiped his badge in at 11:42? Gotcha, I couldn't do this alone. Not just because I was one slip away from a lawsuit, but because taking down a man like Eric meant credibility. I was already radioactive. No one would believe bitter ex-employee me unless I had backup. Enter Marissa. Marissa had been a senior project accountant at the firm until she left in disgust 2 years prior. She and I had stayed in touch over coffee now and then, and she'd always joke, "That place will collapse under Eric's ego someday." When I laid out my findings across her kitchen table, her jaw clenched so hard I thought she'd crack a tooth. I knew he was pulling this shit. I saw invoices that didn't add up, but every time I asked questions, he shut me out. Marissa became my first ally. She had old financial records tucked away, copies she'd kept because she didn't trust Eric. They matched my suspicions like puzzle pieces. Next came James, a site supervisor with nothing left to lose. He'd been laid off after a budget overrun. To read Eric's siphoning funds, and he still burned with resentment. When I showed him how Eric had doctored reports under my name, James laughed bitterly. Classic Eric. He's been doing this since before you got hired. Let's burn him. Between the three of us, we had a mountain of dirt. But dirt alone doesn't topple kings. Phase 3, the Trojan horse. I knew Eric's greatest weakness is vanity. He loved recognition, awards, any shiny thing he could dangle in front of the partners to prove his value. So I built a trap disguised as flattery. I designed a fake industry award, glitzy sounding recognition program called the American Excellence in Urban Design Initiative. I mocked up a website, press releases, even a fabricated board of directors with stock photos wearing suits, all of it dripping with legitimacy. Then I nominated Eric anonymously, citing his innovative cost-saving measures and leadership. The bait worked faster than I expected. Within weeks, Eric was bragging in the office about being a finalist for a prestigious new award. Trevor, his golf buddy, lapped it up, and soon the partners were congratulating him on his brilliance. What Eric didn't know was that part of the award process required a detailed submission of recent projects for evaluation. In other words, his own fraudulent paper trail, gift wrapped and handed over voluntarily. The more he scrambled to highlight his achievements, the deeper he buried himself. Revenge feels sweet in your head, but in reality, it's a minefield. One wrong move, and I'd be the one in handcuffs. So I lawyered up. Not officially, couldn't afford it, but I met with a legal aid attorney under the guise of whistleblower concerns. She didn't know names, just scenarios, but she confirmed what I needed. If I presented hard evidence of fraud, I'd have protection under whistleblower laws. Still, protection didn't equal immunity. If Eric caught wind of my investigation before I was ready, he'd crush me like an ant. So I worked in silence, never using my personal accounts, always scrubbing metadata, keeping files on encrypted drives. Every day I woke up with a knot in my gut, terrified he'd discover me. I'd imagine him storming my apartment with lawyers, or worse, twisting things so I ended up on the hook for his crimes. But paranoia can be fuel. It kept me sharp. The turning point came when Marissa's old records revealed something bigger than kickbacks. Buried in a stack of invoices was a payment authorization for safety materials, thousands of dollars earmarked for reinforced steel supports on a high-rise condo project. Except those supports were never installed. James confirmed it. We flagged it on site. Eric told us to shut up and keep building. Said it was fine. That building was now fully occupied. Families lived there, kids. People who had no idea their homes were essentially a ticking time bomb because Eric had pocketed the steel money. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was lives at stake. That night, I stared at the city skyline from my balcony, fists clenched. My revenge stopped being personal. It became moral. Eric wasn't just my enemy. He was a danger to everyone. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was resolved. By the time I laid out the final plan, the three of us, me, Marissa, and James, were an unlikely little war council. We'd meet in diners at odd hours, whispering over greasy fries and coffee, sketching timelines and targets. Step 1, let Eric hang himself with the fake award submission. Step 2, package all evidence, our files, his submissions, Marissa's records, James's testimony into a neat, undeniable dossier. Step 3, deliver it simultaneously to 3 places: the partners of the firm, the city inspector general's office, and the press. If we timed it right, Eric wouldn't have room to wriggle out. And just to twist the knife, we'd make sure he was blindsided publicly at the exact moment he thought he was about to be crowned with his fake award. The thought of his smug grin shattering into panic kept me going through sleepless nights. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was orchestrating his downfall. The morning Eric's world began to unravel was crisp, bright, and painfully ordinary. Boston in spring always had that smug quality. The tulips pushing up through cracked sidewalks, the Charles glittering like it had never once been clogged with trash. It was the kind of day you'd expect joggers in neon shorts and college kids with iced coffees, not betrayal and implosion. But I wasn't thinking about scenery. My hands shook as I zipped up my hoodie and double-checked the USB drives in my backpack. 3 identical sticks, each encrypted, each carrying the same bomb of evidence. One was for the partners, one for the city inspector general's office. And the last, the sharpest blade of all, was for the press. We'd picked the day carefully, the fake award ceremony. Not a real event, of course, but a cocktail reception we staged with laughable ease. All it took was booking a mid-tier hotel ballroom under a shell company name and sending Eric an official-looking invitation with the American Excellence in Urban Design Initiative logo splashed across the top. Eric predictably swallowed it whole. He bragged for weeks about being honored and dragged half the firm's partners along to witness his coronation. And that was exactly what I wanted. The ballroom buzzed with small talk when I slipped inside. I wore a borrowed suit and an anonymous smile, blending into the crowd of architects and city officials we'd lured with free drinks and catered hors d'oeuvres. They thought it was some networking event. Only a handful of us knew it was an ambush. Eric stood at the center of it all, basking in attention like a lizard on a heat lamp. His teeth gleamed. His watch flashed. Trevor, the golf buddy, orbited him like a loyal moon. The partners clustered nearby, already half convinced this award would validate their faith in Eric as a visionary. I caught Marissa's eye across the room. She gave the smallest nod. James leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. We were ready. At exactly 7:30, I excused myself to the hallway, pulled out my phone, and hit send. 3 emails shot into cyberspace simultaneously. To the partners, a dossier with timelines, forged invoices, shell company registrations, and proof of safety violations. To the city inspector general, a report detailing Eric's fraud and the missing steel supports in the occupied condo tower. To the Boston Globe's investigative desk, the entire story, packaged neatly, complete with quotes from subcontractors, photos of forged documents, and Marissa's financial records. The moment the progress bar hit 100%, my chest loosened for the first time in months. It was done, but the real fireworks hadn't even started. Back inside, the ceremony kicked off. A local actor we'd hired as the ward chair, a friend of James's sister who thought the whole thing was hilarious, took the podium. He gave a flowery speech about integrity in urban design and leaders who shape the skylines of tomorrow. Eric nearly levitated with pride. When his name was called, he strutted to the stage, clapping himself on the back, partners beaming at him like proud parents. Cameras flashed. And then, timing like a playwright, the first partner's phone buzzed, then another, then another. I watched their smiles flicker into confusion, then drain into horror as they skimmed the incoming dossier. One partner whispered furiously to another, pointing at the attachments. Trevor leaned in to peek, his brow furrowing. Eric, oblivious, launched into an acceptance speech dripping with self-congratulation. This recognition is a testament not just to me, but to the incredible team I've built. Eric. The voice cut through the applause like a blade. It was Margaret, the senior-most partner. 70 years old, razor, sharp, known for slicing interns to ribbons with a single arched eyebrow. She stood holding her phone aloft like evidence at a trial. Care to explain this? Eric blinked. Margaret, perhaps we can discuss? But Margaret wasn't alone. Every partner in the room now had the same email open, scrolling through damning evidence. Forged signatures, kickback trails, safety violations, photos of unfinished supports in a building full of families. And as if on cue, James slipped out to the lobby. Moments later, two city inspectors walked into the ballroom, stern-faced, scanning for Eric. The timing was exquisite. Eric faltered mid-sentence, sweat blooming on his temples. This is nonsense, fabricated by a disgruntled employee. You all know me. Enough. Margaret's voice was ice. We're suspending you effective immediately. This is catastrophic. The inspector stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, we need to speak with you about irregularities in your firm's recent projects, particularly the Seaport condominiums. Care to accompany us? The room went dead silent. Dozens of eyes fixed on Eric, watching the empire he'd built crumble in real time. His jaw worked furiously, but no words came. And then the final nail. A reporter burst through the ballroom doors, press badge swinging. He held up his phone, already recording. Eric Whitmore. Care to comment on the allegations that you falsified safety reports and endangered hundreds of residents for profit? Can Eric's face drained of color? Cameras turned, flashes popping. Half the crowd pulled out their phones, recording the spectacle. The man who had humiliated me, destroyed my career, and strutted like an untouchable god now stood cornered, stammering, his mask ripped clean off in front of the entire industry. It was better than I'd ever imagined. Of course, Eric did what rats always do when cornered. He bolted. He shoved past the inspector, knocking over a table of champagne glasses, and stormed toward the exit. But the hotel lobby was already crawling with reporters tipped off by the Globe. His escape became a gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Did you take bribes, Mr. Whitmore? Are you responsible for the missing steel supports? Are you aware you're under investigation for fraud? Eric shoved through them like a drowning man, wild-eyed, his tie askew, his perfect hair collapsing under sweat, and I stayed inside, sipping champagne, watching the chaos unfold on a live stream someone was broadcasting to Twitter. For the first time in months, Atlas's judgmental little face flashed in my mind, and I imagined him purring in satisfaction. By the end of the night, Eric's implosion was trending online. The Globe ran the story with damning precision. Boston architect accused of multi-million-dollar fraud, safety cover. Up, local TV stations replayed the footage of him fleeing the hotel, ducking from microphones, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a criminal on the run. The partners issued a statement distancing themselves, suspending him pending investigation. City officials announced emergency inspections of every building Eric had touched in the last 5 years. And me. I didn't exist in the story. The whistleblower was anonymous. My name was nowhere in the press. To the world, I was invisible. But to Eric, oh, he knew. I knew at the moment my phone buzzed at 1 a.m. with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. His voice was ragged, furious. You think you've won. This isn't over. I'll find out it was you. I deleted it before he could finish. Because I didn't need to hear threats. I'd already won. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. For months, I'd fantasized about this moment, about the sweetness of revenge. And it was sweet, yes, but it was also sobering. I'd set fire to a man's life. Deservedly, but still, there was no going back. I whispered into the dark to no one but Atlas curled at my feet. Act IV begins tomorrow, and I fell asleep smiling. The first few days after the revenge went off felt almost unreal. I had spent months in planning, weeks fine tuning, and countless nights staring at spreadsheets and documents, making sure every thread was tight. When it all finally snapped into motion, part of me expected some sort of fireworks. Sirens in the night, maybe even Carl calling me in a rage, demanding to know if I had been the one behind it. But that's not how real life works. Real life creeps. On Friday, I executed my plan. By Monday morning, the phone lines at Carl's company were lit up like a Christmas tree. At first, the chaos was quiet. A few whispers in the hallways, people walking past the office door without making eye contact, emails getting flagged urgent with no context. But then the agencies descended, suits with clipboards, briefcases, and questions sharp enough to draw blood. They wanted documents, signatures, records. They wanted to know why a pattern of numbers didn't add up. They wanted receipts, and Carl's smug, red faced Carl didn't have answers. I had made sure of that. Word spread faster than any memo ever could. By Wednesday, 3 clients had already pulled out. The first was an old money family that had trusted Carl's firm for years, building their summer mansions and luxury condos. When they heard fraud investigation, they dropped him cold, hiring a rival firm within the same week. The second was a tech startup CEO, young and flashy, who cared about appearances above all else. He didn't even wait for confirmation. One whiff of scandal, and he sent Carl a scathing email. This project is terminated effective immediately. Expect no further payments. The third client, though, was my favorite. That was an international developer, a giant with deep pockets and deeper pride. They'd invested millions into one of Carl's projects. When the news hit, they not only pulled out but also filed suit for breach of contract. Their lawyers came at Carl like wolves. I still remember hearing through the grapevine that Carl tried to hold a staff meeting, telling everyone it was all just a misunderstanding, that the company was too big to fail, but no one bought it. People started quitting in droves, jumping ship before the Titanic sank. Project managers, site supervisors, even junior accountants, gone within weeks. Matt, of course, was left holding the bag. I almost pitied him, almost. When I first saw Matt step into my role, his hair slicked back, wearing that ridiculous too tight suit, I thought he was just a pawn. Arrogant, but ultimately harmless. I underestimated him at first, thinking he'd crash within a month, but Carl had propped him up, shielding him, giving him the illusion of competence. Once Carl was busy fending off lawyers and regulators, Matt was exposed. Emails started leaking. Angry subcontractors complaining they hadn't been paid in weeks. Site foremen confused by contradictory instructions. Engineers throwing up their hands because Matt kept insisting on cost-cutting measures that ignored basic safety codes. One story reached me that made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Matt had actually told a crane operator to just work around it when a shipment of steel beams arrived late. Work around it, as if several tons of steel were an optional inconvenience. The operator reported him. By then, even the union reps were mocking him. And the pressure, oh, the pressure crushed him like a tin can. I heard he started showing up late, looking pale, stammering in meetings. He lost weight. His tie hung loose. The smug smirk vanished. Eventually, he made a desperate move. He tried to throw Carl under the bus, claimed Carl had forced him into decisions, that he was just following orders. But when investigators looked into it, Matt's name was on dozens of emails and contracts. He was complicit, whether he understood what he'd signed or not. And in business, ignorance is no defense. Last I heard, he quietly withdrew from the industry entirely, tail between his legs, back in school to pivot into consulting. Consulting. That word still makes me laugh. Carl's collapse wasn't instant, but it was complete. The board turned on him as soon as it was clear he couldn't contain the damage. They forced him into early retirement, which was just a polite way of saying, get out before we burn you. He left the office carrying the same kind of cardboard box I had carried out months earlier. Poetic, isn't it? But unlike me, Carl didn't have a future waiting. His reputation was toxic. No firm would touch him. His golf buddies, the same ones he'd bent rules for, ghosted him. They couldn't risk their own names being tied to a sinking ship. Even his country club revoked his membership quietly, citing bylaws that had never mattered before. Then came the personal fallout. His wife, a woman who had always relished the high society lifestyle, filed for divorce within 6 months. Rumor had it she cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the truth. She wasn't going to hitch her wagon to a fallen star. Their divorce was messy. The house, the cars, the lake property, they all got sliced apart like a butcher carving meat. When I heard that Carl had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a bland suburban complex, I didn't cheer. No, I savored, slowly, like letting a fine wine linger on the tongue, because it wasn't just financial ruin. It was humiliation, and Carl thrived on status. Without it, he was nothing. The first time I saw Carl after everything, it was by accident. I was walking downtown near a cafe I frequented when I spotted him sitting alone at an outdoor table. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. His hair, once slicked back with expensive gel, was thinning. His shirt was wrinkled. He was stirring a cup of coffee absent-mindedly, eyes darting around like a man waiting for judgment. For a moment, he looked up and our eyes met. I expected rage. I expected suspicion. Instead, I saw fear. Paranoia. Maybe he didn't know for certain that I'd been behind it, but deep down, I think he did. Or maybe he suspected everyone. That's the worst prison of all, never knowing who swung the axe. I walked past him without a word. But I'll admit it, I smiled. While Carl's empire crumbled, mine was just beginning. The rival firm that recruited me didn't just give me a job, they gave me respect. They wanted me because they knew I could deliver, and I did. I spearheaded projects that finished under budget and ahead of schedule. My team thrived under my leadership. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying dead weight. Financially, I was soaring. The signing bonus alone wiped out my student debt. The profit-sharing checks were larger than my entire old salary. I moved into a better place, took vacations I'd been postponing for years, and reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. But more importantly, I had balance. I wasn't chained to my phone 24/7. I wasn't sacrificing everything for a boss who saw me as disposable. I was finally living. Do I regret it? No. People love to moralize about revenge. They say it's poisonous, that it eats you alive, that living well is the best revenge. But those are the words of people who've never been screwed over so thoroughly that living well isn't enough. Carl betrayed me. He replaced me with someone laughably unqualified, tossed me aside after years of loyalty, and expected me to slink away quietly. He thought he'd buried me. Instead, I became the storm that buried him. And here's the truth: revenge didn't consume me, it freed me. It let me shed the bitterness, the anger, the weight of injustice. Because once Carl fell, once justice was dealt my way, I no longer had to carry it. Now, when I look back, I don't see myself as the victim anymore. I see myself as the architect of my own justice. And Carl, he's just a cautionary tale.